Hi, everybody. I'm here with Justin Barrett. Really, it's an honor to speak with him, and he's heavily involved in the nationalist movement in Ireland. Many of my viewers are Americans and know absolutely nothing about Ireland, so here's our chance to learn about what's going on over there. And I'm just going to start it off right with my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Is that the nationalist movement in Ireland is growing, and there is actually a nationalist party, but it seems like, to my understanding, the Nationalist Party in Ireland is run by some sort of like Haji boomers that don't want to let you talk about Hitler. Is that correct?
Well, to be absolutely correct, is that although the nationalist movement, in terms of the number of people who are involved in it, or would turn up to a rally or a public demonstration, is quite large, but the actual organizations representing those people are themselves relatively small and fragmented too. There are three registered political parties. That's three parties registered to put candidates on the ballot paper if there were to be an election of any kind, general election, which is for the Irish Parliament, I suppose the equivalent of Congress, the local elections, or European elections. So while the movement is growing. The organization of the movement has not been growing, first of all, at the same pace. It's very fragmented. And as of this moment, it is very much conservatively, in all the worst senses of the word conservative, conservatively optics motivated. Now, this
Hmm.
hasn't made a terrible amount of difference to their voting record, which is that it's quite poor as well. To actually motivate people to come out and vote for their candidates, these good optics, as they would call it, hasn't been very effective. But yeah, absolutely, it is a certain age cohort, largely. It's age related. But no, you absolutely can't talk about National Socialism. You cannot talk about Adolf Hitler. You cannot talk about the events of the last century. You cannot talk honestly about history at all. And you certainly cannot talk, uh, well, you can, but they don't want you to, right? Let's rephrase that. You can, but they don't want you to. And they will try and close you down for doing so, talking about the Jewish question or the Jewish problem in its modern application worldwide, and specifically its application within the political structure that is Ireland. So we are where on the one hand we have all these advantages, which is to say that we've had a grassroots movement emerge almost by itself over the last 2 to 3, 4 years, which is would be very significant in number if it had organization, if it had leadership, and if it had ideology. But it has none of those things. And the problem in having none of those things is that it is impossible then to bring those numbers to bear in terms of actual political influence or in actually doing anything that would make a significant difference to the situation that ordinary Irish people have to live in, or that the nationalist movement in particular has to maneuver within.
So it's very fragmented at basically anything above the grassroots level is very fragmented into smaller groups, and there's not a lot of organization. What's the greatest barrier if you were to change a few things and help unite people into one nationalist movement? What are the greatest barriers to that happening?
Right. The single greatest barrier is the emergence of certain individuals
I hear
who are.
Conor McGregor is involved somehow.
Well, Conor McGregor now has just withdrawn from the presidential election here. Now, not received a nomination.
Right.
But the extent to which he is responsible for or even involved in the movement as such has been for the past 6 months or so. So he is neither, I would say Conor McGregor is neither the problem nor the solution. He has withdrawn himself from the presidential election. I don't blame him for doing that. The mechanism by which you get a nomination for the presidency in Ireland is really controlled by the political cartel, by the Uni Party, as it were.
As it is here.
Yeah, so to that extent, one couldn't blame him for withdrawing. He was never going to get a nomination. I think it was he advanced his name with the purposes of getting publicity, and in the process of getting publicity, putting certain ideas out there using the public profile that he has to maybe advance the agenda. I don't know, because was never directly involved with Conor's campaign insofar as there was one. And as I say, he's a newcomer in the sense of being involved. He's not the problem, and so far he is not the solution either. No, I would say, if I was to put the single greatest problem, is been, see, I founded in 2016, I founded a political party called the National Party, which by the name's suggestion was a nationalist party. Now, it was the first foray into nationalist politics in a political way for a very long time in this country. We went through some heavy headwinds at the beginning for the first couple of years, just in terms of recruiting, in terms of getting people to understand that there was a problem, and getting people to understand that the mass immigration was already a problem and was going to become an increasing problem. And then when we had kind of broken the ground, a number of other individuals emerged, and they started forming new political parties with no obvious reason for doing so, except for the personal vanity, I guess.
Well, they all had their own little brand of nationalism, I'm sure, and also they had different ideas on the optics issue, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah, exactly. But the optics were not really the issue at the beginning. I think it was the first break, for example, with setting up something that was not the National Party. The first break was done on a purely personal basis. That the individual involved had worked with Nigel Farage and UKIP in England, and therefore thought he was far more politically savvy. He knew how the game was played, etc., etc. But there was a good deal of ego involved as well. He wasn't going to be part of an organization that he wasn't a leader of. So he set up his own organization. That got a certain distance, not very far. Then another organization was set up as a political party. And again, there was another individual at the head of it who would prefer to be the leader of a small group rather than a follower of a bigger group. And so individuals started emerging as leaders of registered political parties. And then leaders, I use the word very loosely here when I say leader, insofar as, like, to what extent were they capable of leading anything? To what extent more importantly, to what extent did anybody actually follow them or pay heed to them? But they emerged as public figures, and they emerged as somebody that the media went to in terms of being the voice of the nationalist movement, who didn't actually have political parties per se, but formed organizations and associations. And then, of course, I had my own personal problems, personal political problems within the National Party, where a small group of individuals, but key individuals within the National Party, took control of the mechanisms of the party. When I say the mechanisms, I mean the social media, the bank accounts, etc., etc.
The stuff that matters.
but the legality of their takeover is still being, shall we say, processed. So ultimately, they will not win that. And when they do not win that, then the acknowledged leadership of that party will revert to myself. But the amount of damage they have done to the brand, to the label, and the amount of confusion they have caused in the meanwhile, all that was entirely based on optics. That was entirely based on the idea that they felt that the plans that I had for the party were going to make it, inverted commas, an extremist organization. We're going to take it out of being politically saleable to the general electorate, and they didn't want to do that, and they wouldn't cooperate with that, so they illegally took over. But we're going to have to revive that party now. In the meantime, knowing that the process was to reassert proper legal control was going to take a considerable length of time, I set up the association called Clann, with the purposes of gathering those who were loyal to me within the National Party, also with continuing the process of recruiting new people to the nationalist movement in general. And yes, I did take a more strident line politically, as I intended to do with the party. I took a more strident line politically with what the Clann was going to say, in how it was going to say it, in how it was going to present it. And we have started the process. That's the only way, like, I can say it, is in 2024 we started the process of rebuilding what had been shattered by the coup within the National Party. But again, outside of that, outside of our own internal difficulties, if you want to call them that, you have this broad problem across the nationalist movement in Ireland, which is fragmentation, breakdown, individuals who purport to speak in the name of the national movement, but their right to speak in the national movement for the national movement would be very questionable in terms of the amount of actual support they have as individuals. And above all else, we had a general election last year. That's an election to our parliament, as I said, kind of the equivalent to Congress. None of those parties, for all their declarations of they were more politically savvy, they had better optics, they so on and so forth, they would be much better political operators. They would reach Middle Ireland, as they call it, better. As I'm sure you've found in the United States as well, reaching Middle America. Well, they didn't do that either.
Right.
They did not significantly increase, despite a massive increase in immigration of foreigners into Ireland, and in particular non-white foreigners into Ireland, despite the fact that that issue was very much on the minds of the electorate. These political parties made no significant progress in the general election as opposed to the previous one, which was in 2020. They got nobody elected. So their better optics, which was designed to get people elected, and I met many.
It didn't get people elected.
It didn't get people elected. And I met many people who said to me, okay, we agree with what you're saying, but what you're saying will never get anybody elected. Well, last year we got the evidence that saying what they were saying wasn't getting anybody elected either. But the difference, I would suggest, is that they had abandoned all sense of principle. They had abandoned their beliefs. They had abandoned the solid ground of ideology and of a faith. And I don't mean that in a religious sense. I mean a faith in their own brand, if you want to call it that, as their way forward, as something that could solve the problems that Ireland was facing. they abandoned that and didn't win any extra votes for the difference. So they failed on both levels. They failed on principle, and they failed in practical terms as well. And practicalities was what they threw at me: is you're not being practical, you're not being realistic. What you're saying is all very well, and we agree with you, but it won't work. Well, they sold out, and the sellout didn't sell. That
I
didn't
think
work.
they're underestimating the ability of the common people to understand the problems facing society when it's actually laid out in front of them. They put the optics filter on, and then they're indistinguishable from your typical, we would call like milk toast conservatives, and that's why no one's paying attention to them. The more sort of more like politically inconvenient aspects of nationalism is what makes it nationalism, and not just another brand of conservatism. All the people that are concerned about optics, aside from the ones that are just legitimately controlled by Mossad, I think the rest of them are just really underestimating how hard and how fast the Overton window is shifting in society. As an example, one of the most popular right wing commentators in the United States, Tucker Carlson, just 2 months ago, he mentioned in one of his streams or whatever he does now, he mentioned our project, Return to the Land, not by name, but he mentioned it clearly. And then in the very same podcast, he was, his guest was talking about suggesting that the United States should have allied with Adolf Hitler in World War II to be able to fight Stalin. And Tucker was like, "Yup." And it's like those are things you could never have imagined them talking about years ago. Of course, immediately afterwards, they confirmed that the official story of the Holocaust was correct because they have to do that. But the Overton window is shifting very hard, very fast, and these people that start right wing associations and political parties and are overly worried about optics, yeah, they're shooting themselves in the foot. I'm wondering, you were talking about Middle Ireland, the so-called common people. I've seen a lot of footage of protests in Ireland, and there have been a lot of young guys throwing stuff at police, even setting buildings on fire that are under contract to house migrants and things like that. If you were to estimate how many of those young guys who are out in the streets fighting against immigration, how many of them know that it's sort of like Jewish finance and Jewish charities behind the immigration, and versus how many of them are sort of swept up by the Tommy Robinson narrative that it has nothing to do with them and we just have to, endlessly fight the immigration that's never going to stop.
I would say the answer to that is significantly more than even 2 years ago. Significantly more, are at least aware of the label. Now, if you want to go into the deep history of the Second World War, the deep history of the Rothschild banking family, or indeed how banking controls the politics of the world, we can't expect the average person in the street to get that um, without being like significantly more educated in that question than they currently are. And of course, the barrier to that is that those in the nationalist movement who know aren't willing to say. So significantly more than there were, but still a tiny number. I would say the young people who are involved in the various protests, the blood is up, and that's a good thing in and of itself. The blood is up. They want to stand up for their nation and their own future. They want to stand up against the mass immigration that's coming in. But again, it's in a disorganized fashion. It lacks discipline, and above all else, it lacks ideology. It lacks any notion of a concept of what we would replace it with if we were to be in a position to be. It's a criticism of current government policy without a belief system which suggests this is what government policy should be, and this is what it would be, this is how the country would be run, other than literally summed up in the chant, and the chant in and of itself, I cannot disagree with them, which is to get them out. And that's something, if anybody's watching the videos coming out of Ireland, they will see time and time again. That is not led by any leadership. that is not led by the leaders of any of the groups, because any of the groups would be, other than ourselves, would be opposed to language that was as extreme or as blunt as just saying, get them out. They would prefer that in terms of reaching that like middle Ireland, which is very lethargic at the moment. It is true. It is absolutely true. Is the people willing to go out into the streets and protest about the question of immigration are still a relatively small number. The people who are willing to go out and vote about it are a relatively small number. But what I find all the most dismally disappointing is that there is no work being put into rallying that discontent and that general feeling that things are going wrong in the country into any kind of an organization which could actually affect political change, either electorally or otherwise. The effort has not been put in there. And the effort in terms of ideological education as to who is behind the problem and who is causing us to be in the situation we're in is on behalf of the other groups is practically zero. Now, some of that has to do with the fact that some of the leaders of those groups actually don't understand the issue themselves. They literally don't know. So to that extent, they can be regarded as genuine when they say, oh, well, like, we don't believe the Jews are the problem, or the Jewish-controlled international finance capital is playing any role in the migration crisis to our country. Are they telling the truth as they see it? They are, insofar as they're ignorant enough not to know it. But some of them are very calculatedly making the decision that they will not say this because of the problems that would cause them in their own personal lives. They will not take the risk. They will not take the chance. And in that context, one can only regard those people as traitors. There's no other word for it. They know, they won't say, and they won't say. They will cover that with, oh, well, it's not politically convenient to say. But no, what they actually mean is that they would not be able to advance their own political careers, and they would not be able to advance in life in general. They might lose their jobs, they might lose their livelihoods, they might lose their social standing.
They're not willing to sacrifice anything, basically.
They're not willing to sacrifice anything. And that's the leadership, collectively speaking, the leadership of the nationalist movement. First of all, they won't work with each other. All the optics people, for example, they won't work with each other either. They won't work with me, and they say, oh, well, we won't work with Justin Barrett because he's anti-Semitic, because he's openly National Socialist, because he's too much of an extremist, because he's crazy in the variety of definitions of crazy. But they won't work with each other either. Even the ones who are, shall we say, optically the same. They will not work with each other. They will not form one organization. And that's why I say ego is trumping the whole thing. Is they would prefer to be a big fish in a small pond than a small fish in the ocean that is the actual problem.
Yeah. Now, in the nationalist movement in Ireland, I would assume that there's a lot of Catholics. There's probably some Protestants, and there might even be a small but growing tide of those young guys who want to bring back like the ancient Celtic deities. And do you think that differences in religion are part of the issue in the nationalist movement, or can we actually have a multi-religious nationalist movement and still move forward and still unify in other ways based on political views?
I would say that in Southern Ireland, that is the 26 county state, which is not under British jurisdiction, the population is either overwhelmingly Catholic, and therefore they are the people that we can actually appeal to, or they are overwhelmingly secular. We do not have a large Protestant population in the south.
Okay. Yeah.
Within the six-county area, which is under British jurisdiction, it's entirely different matter. There's a slight Protestant majority there, and
Mm.
the question of where they stand vis-a-vis nationalism is complicated by a loyalty to the Protestant element there is complicated by a loyalty to the British Crown as against, but then there's a hostility to the mass migration as well, and so on. So it gets very complicated when you go up to the six counties. There is a growing segment, but it's still marginal and small, of what we might call pagan nationalism,
Yeah.
which might be significant in other countries, but is not particularly significant here in numbers terms.
I was
But
wondering about that because we have a lot of them in the U.S. It's
but then
still
you
not
break down.
huge, but
The problem is that you break down in arguments. In my opinion, you break down into arguments that have nothing to do with the problems we're actually facing. And
people love to argue about religion. We had
so,
to actually sort of ban that in our group because people would just go to town with it. It would get
yeah,
insane. It's like
exactly.
we're here to save our people. We can argue about that afterwards.
Like even when I say something like, for example, the overwhelming majority of the population in the south, in the 26 county state, is Catholic. Well, that fragments into what do you mean by Catholic? And you've got people for example, like myself. I regard myself as Roman Catholic, but I know my definition of Roman Catholicism is very traditionalist, and I know it's not shared by a lot of people who would regard themselves as Catholic. Now, it's not obviously not shared by people who are Protestant, and it's obviously not shared by people who would regard themselves as pagan. But then I don't push my Roman Catholicism on the membership of Clann. I don't insist that number one they endorse Roman Catholicism, nor that they endorse the particular traditionalist variety of Roman Catholicism that I personally adhere to. And I would try and keep religion, except for Christian values, out of the movement entirely. And when I talk about Christian values, I find that if the pagans are not LARPing, this to use the classic phrase, if the pagans are not actually LARPing, the agreement on the actual moral values is there. In other words, if I say to them, look, you don't accept a Christian perspective on why this is right and this is wrong. You don't accept its origin within the context of the Christian religion, or within the context of the Catholic religion, or within the context of a subset of traditionalist Catholicism. But do you accept that this is right within a pagan perspective, and this is wrong within a pagan perspective? And they will answer, yes, I accept that what you're defining as right and you're calling Catholic is within my perception of paganism, or my perception of the old Celtic ways or the old Celtic traditions, is objectively correct in the
Yeah,
modern world as it was in the old world.
we find that as
Um,
well.
and
In our
and
urban,
then
yeah,
and what I say is wrong. If I say I believe it's wrong because of Catholicism, and you say it's wrong because of paganism, can we not unite on the fact that we both recognize that the phenomenon is wrong, or on the other side of it, that the phenomenon is right? And let's leave aside our motivations for arriving at that conclusion, and leave aside fighting about whether my perspective on that is Christian, or my perspective on that is pagan, or your perspective is Christian or pagan, and let's agree on a set of objective principles that we say these things are right and necessary in order for society to function in a healthy and desirable way. And these things are wrong and they are bad for society and its capacity to function in a right and proper way. and never not argue about where those principles that we agree on need to find their foundation or their premise from. The insistence that they must be from a particular religious origin is to be found more, or at least it's to be found more aggressively expressed on the pagan side. I find most Christians in Ireland, anyway, you see, but you know, Ireland is hard. Ireland has a kind of a laid back attitude to religion. One of the reasons being that within Catholicism, it used to be so much part of the dominant culture that it was taken for granted, and so therefore it wasn't examined in any great degree. And to a large extent, therefore, Irish people are more likely to ask you what your differences with them are on actual issues, rather than, you know, because 20 years ago, if you asking an Irish person in the South, asking an Irish person whether they were Catholic or not was a pointless question, because everybody said Catholic. But what we realized as the culture wars began is that people had a variety of notions of what they meant when they said that. But the hostility and the aggression within, on social media at least, has been from the anti-Christian side, shall we say, among people who are genuine. Now, there are people who are not being genuine about this, and there are people who are just LARPing about it. And there are people on the Christian side who are just LARPing about their Christianity as well. And they end up with phrases like Judeo-Christianity, or this nonsense of dispensationalist Christianity, which leads them straight into Zionism. And that's a whole other kettle of fish. And then we have the secular, non-Christian, anti-Christians, which I would say, whether we like it or not, now make up the majority of the voting electorate in Ireland. They don't make up the majority of the nationalist movement, but they make up a majority of the population. And they are not just hostile to Christianity as a denomination. They're not hostile to Catholicism as a denomination. They are hostile to the whole value system that comes with Christianity, which happens to be a value system that we largely share with the Protestants, and that we largely share with the pagans too. They're hostile to Western culture and civilization. They are agents of demoralization and destruction. And although they wouldn't regard themselves as being of any religious persuasion at all, they might describe themselves as atheists indeed, they work in practice at the behest of international finance, and in practice they work for the Jews.
I was just going to say, I effectively consider those people to be Jews. Anytime I'm on X or somewhere and I see somebody ranting about how horrible Christianity is and trying to divide the movement, or like you said, being completely against modern liberals that are completely against the entire value system that's shared by both Christians and pagans. I just write down the person in my book as being Jewish, and that's it. I mean, Karl Marx wrote a nice big essay about how you don't have to be genetically Jewish to be a Jew. You could just adopt Jewish behaviors, and that effectively makes you Jewish. One of the only good things that came out of Karl Marx was that observation.
So Dr. Goebbels talked about the spiritual Jew as well, and we have plenty of them. Now, they wouldn't even, some of them are even anti-Israel. Some of them are taking a very anti-Zionist view, particularly those on the far left, or even the middle left in Ireland, taking a very hostile view of Israel, taking a very hostile view of Zionism, taking a very hostile view of what is going on in the Gaza Strip area
We
now.
have that in the
But
U.S. as well with the extreme left, and it's a weird manifestation of horseshoe theory because like you have the extreme left is very anti-Israel and the extreme right is very anti-Israel for completely different reasons, and the rest of the morals don't line up. But there's that one weird thing that they're all starting to
it's
agree on
that
now.
one weird thing, but once one goes outside the question of Zionism and Israel and the actual political and humanitarian questions that the Gaza situation, shall we say, bring up on everything else, on absolutely everything else. They are spiritually Jewish. They are led by a Marxist materialist concept of the world, and they share with the Zionists everything but the question of the state of Israel. And even on the state of Israel, a lot of these people who are advancing the Palestinian cause, they say that this thing, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And then you say to them, oh yeah, but what's going to happen to Israel in that context? And their answer is, oh, well, Israel will exist as well. No, wait a minute, from the river to the sea, if from the river to the sea is Palestine, there's no more Israel. Are you okay with that?
I
And my answer
I
to
could
that
get on
is,
board with that.
I am okay with that. I am okay with that. I want from the river to the sea can be Palestine in the Middle East. I'm okay with that. And I'm okay with the logical deduction that proceeds from that, which is that will be the end of the state of Israel. But you say that to these left-wing pro-Palestinians, and they say, "Oh well, we have no problem with Israelis as such, and we certainly have no problem with the Jews, and we have no problem with the idea of there being a Jewish state. It just can't be in Palestine." But it is in Palestine, so the Zionists are correct to this extent is if Palestine is to be free from the river to the sea, there cannot be an Israel there. And the leftists just block that cognitive dissonance. They just block that from their heads and they say, no, no, we believe in a two-state solution. Well, a two-state solution to the Middle Eastern problem where both peoples get to live in two separate states on the same land. I mean, we've heard the phrase of playing 5D chess, it's how Donald Trump is supposed to be playing all the time. But they're talking about like having the Israelis live on the same land as the Palestinians, but not in the same place. So it would require the current geographic area to exist in two separate
Well, we
dimensions.
would have to bend space time and get them to
Well,
live. They would have to like go out of phase, like in Star Trek, and they could live literally right in the same space as each other.
but to
I
me,
mean,
they will just then that discussion ends with "shut up, Nazi." Right? And then that's the end of the discussion.
yeah, I have a lot of ideas about things we could do with Israel, but most of them probably can't be said on camera. I do like, however, Donald Trump's idea. He talked about building a bunch of vacation resorts on the beach in Israel. I think we should do that to the whole country. I'm sure everyone that lives there can find somewhere else to live, and we can just fill the entire country with like American vacation resorts. I think that would be probably the best thing we could do with that
Well, look,
country.
they certainly found some place to live for the last 3,000 years, despite the fact that God had promised them this land.
Well, we made that country for them, and they won't stay in it. They just keep coming
Well,
over here. I don't understand.
exactly. If there would be a case to be made for a Jewish state for the Jewish people, if the Jews would only go and live in it. But what there is not a case for, and we find this description in Mein Kampf written in 1924 about what would happen if the Jews got, or if the Zionist Jews in particular, got what they wanted, what they were asking for. This is some 30 odd years before the foundation of the State of Israel. And that it would become the headquarters of criminal international Jewry around the world. And that's exactly what has happened. That is
Very
exactly right.
prophetic.
It is a headquarters. It is a place beyond the extradition laws of other countries for criminals who commit their crimes in Western countries, largely in Western countries, not just, mind you, because Jewish International Finance Capital finds the resources of Africa, perhaps not the people of Africa to be of much use, but the resources of the continent of Africa to be very useful. So they commit crimes there too. But largely their crimes are in the Western world. They're financial crimes, they're pedophilic crimes, they're sexual crimes in general, they're ordinary everyday murders and thefts and robberies, along with their institutionalized theft through the banking system and so forth. And whenever they are caught in breach of what little laws in the West stand in their way, they run to Israel, and Israel says, no, we have a rule that we don't extradite anybody, and so the criminal enterprise can operate.
All the pedophiles fly there. They have an issue with pedophilia, and it's one of the things that exposes all the psyops they carry out in the media. Because in the United States, when you talk about institutions carrying out and covering up pedophilia, the first thing most people think of is the Catholic Church and the Catholic priests, and they certainly made a big fuss about that, and it certainly was a bit of an issue. But if you look at the numbers, Jewish synagogues actually have a much higher per capita child abuse rate than the Catholic Church. And actually, if you look at American public schools, they have a much higher child sexual abuse rate than the Catholic Church. But the only thing people ever think about when you talk about institutional child abuse is the Catholic Church. So it's just like the Jewish media to scapegoat the Catholic Church for something that they do way more, and the public schools even do way more. So almost like it's one of the institutions that do it the least out of all the big institutions. I mean, it shouldn't be a problem at all, but
it shouldn't be a problem at all. But here's the thing. This is kind of crucial to the whole argument. Is a Catholic priest who engages in sexual abuse is acting contrary to the Catholic doctrine. A Jewish rabbi that engages in child sexual abuse is not acting contrary to the Talmud.
right.
This is really actually very, very important, because the Catholic priest who behaves like that is obviously acting contrary to the law of the state that he lives in, the country that he lives in. But he is also acting in contrary to Catholic doctrine. And anybody who cooperates with him, no matter how high up in the institution of the church they are the Catholic Church, they are also acting contrary to the doctrine of the church that they purport to represent. So they are acting in an anti-Catholic way as well. But as a Jewish rabbi, or as a Jew in general, well, as long as you follow the rules of child sexual abuse, and as long as you follow the rules of sexual abuse in general, as laid out in the Talmud, you are still good with God, as it were.
It's a long book of like very legalistic rules, ways to get around what they claim to be following, which is the Torah. But everybody knows they don't follow that, because they wrote the Talmud specifically to be able to do everything that the Old Testament tells them not to do. So
yeah, pretty much. And what does the state of Israel do? What role does it play in this? In that particular form of abomination, it's an absolute safe haven. It's an absolute safe haven. It's where you can go when all the power, financial and legal and otherwise, that can be all those levers can have been pulled and haven't worked within, say, the United States, or within Ireland, or within any of the other European countries. When we've tried everything to save you from your own actions as a Jewish person within the legal systems and within the power that we wield in the West, ultimately, if you can make your way to Israel, you'll be safe. And that's what it has become. It has become a safe haven for criminals of all kinds and description, so long as they're ethnically Jewish.
It
And
happened just recently in the U.S. Some major Israeli diplomat got in trouble for sexually assaulting a child. Immediately flew to Israel. Nobody did anything about it.
exactly.
We tried to raise a fuss about it, but Trump doesn't care. So
No, well, he does care. He cares quite a bit in the opposite direction.
yeah,
It's very important part of the. And I tried telling people in Ireland, going back before the election, that Donald Trump was going to win this election. It was not going to be stolen off him. And people said, well, like, of course it's going to be stolen the same way as the 2020 election is stolen. And I said, listen to him, how he talked about the Jews and Zionism in 2016. And I'm not saying he was anti-Zionist, and I'm not saying he was an anti-Semite by any manner or means, but he was not as strong. He was not as clear. He has been courting the Jewish influencers very carefully since his defeat in 2020 to ensure that when he runs for election the next time, that he does not can't come up against their institutional power. Now, did the Jews as people vote overwhelmingly for Kamala Harris? They did. But that's not the important thing, and he knows that too. And everybody who is involved in American politics knows that. It's the institutional power of the Jew within the media and within finance that matters. And he got the Zionist Jews on his side. And from the moment he got the Zionist Jews on his side, he was going to win that presidential election.
the important thing is that he's their goy. That's all that
And
matters.
so was the 2024 election rigged? Probably not in the sense, but it would have been, shall we say, it would have been rigged against him if they couldn't trust him. He wasn't sounding off loud enough in 2015, and he wasn't sounding off loud enough as pro-Israeli in 2016. And there was a degree of skepticism as to whether Donald Trump could be relied upon as president to be a strong defender of Israel. And he realized, and that was true up until 2020, because Donald Trump, as president, simply hadn't dropped enough bombs and fought enough wars against Israel's enemies in the 4 years that he was president in order to qualify as the Jewish candidate. And because of that, they gave it to Joe Biden, who was barely functioning as a human being.
I believe that Obama, I think he started like he started bombing campaigns as like 7 new countries, and Trump started 0, as far as I remember, in his first term. So that was a huge difference.
He started about 3 of those bombing campaigns just before he received the Nobel Peace Prize. Which, even if you go back, right, if you're one of those people that likes the masochistic element of history, to go back and look at the raw live footage from the moment, even Barack Obama's face holding the Nobel Peace Prize was like, I ordered a bombing this morning, and I'm going to go back to oversee the bombing and the destruction this evening. And here I am holding this piece
Jewish
of
trophy.
Even to me, this seems ridiculous. Now, the Nobel Peace Prize, by the way, historically has been the requirement to win a Nobel Peace Prize in the modern world. I don't know what it was, 50 years ago, but why or whatever.
You have to be Jewish, or you have to start wars for the Jews.
And above all else, you have, and then you have to lay some claim to having stopped. Right, so you start a war, you kill a lot of people, and then you come to some kind of agreement whereby you stop, and then they give you a peace prize. This is what happened. This is what happened in Ireland, where Nobel Peace Prizes were given out to people who were involved in the Good Friday Agreement. Now, whatever you think about the situation in the north of Ireland, and whatever you think about the rights and wrongs of it, the absolute requirement was Not that you had been peaceful your entire life, not that you had constantly advocated peace and nothing but peace, but you had to have been an advocate of some degree of war and some degree of killing for a while and agree to stop. Same thing in South Africa with Nelson Mandela. You had to kill a certain number of people, and you had to be in favor of killing a certain number of people, and you had to be in favor of the idea of war, and having won, either won the war or the war having ended in some fashion. Then they gave you a peace prize. But with Barack Obama, they suspended even that rule, which is that you have to stop bombing now. No, you can go back. You can bring it back, put it up on the mantelpiece in the Oval Office, your Nobel Peace Prize, and then pick up the phone and order the joint commanders, joint chiefs, to order another bombing raid and start another war. And that's not a problem. I mean, we won't ask for it back. The absurdity of it. So that's the situation we were in. So I knew that Donald Trump was going to win the election because he was the most pro-Jewish candidate, and it was important that the MAGA base, which is all over the place now, the MAGA base must not oppose a war in the Middle East. And if Kamala Harris had launched a war in the Middle East, which she would have done if she had been told to do so. If Kamala or Joe Biden, if he was still functioning by the election day, which he wasn't, she would have done it, but she could not have brought the MAGA base with her. And from their point of view, then Donald Trump was the better choice, because if we need to start a war in the Middle East, we need to have the MAGA base, which should be America first and should therefore stay out of foreign wars that have nothing to do with American interests. We need that base to be on our side. And only Donald Trump can deliver that to us.
They're still having a very hard time getting his base to support a Middle East war. And I think one of the reasons they had to start that sort of fake 12 days war thing, which wasn't even really a war, earlier this year was they had to save face because they hadn't been able to drum up public support for an Iran war, and they're still unable to. So they did this fake little 12 days war thing so it didn't look bad, so Trump could look like he did what the Zionists wanted, what the Jews wanted him to do, and yada, yada, yada. And for some reason, they're still unable. The vast majority of the American public just really is not interested, whether the liberals or the conservatives.
Yeah, a very interesting phenomenon is beginning to occur. And I hope, or it appears to me that it's beginning to occur, is that the MAGA base, which seemed devoted to Donald Trump to the point of idol worship, has actually started reassessing. Wait a minute. There's still the Fell for It Again award people. There's loads of them. I'm not saying there isn't. But there is a significant section of people who voted for Donald Trump last November who have been watching what he has done since and are going, that's not what I voted for. Now, they didn't do that in 2016, even though they didn't get what they voted for. They didn't do that. They didn't abandon him. But this time, there is a significant section of the people who voted for him. First of all, there's a significant section of his voters who voted for him very reluctantly this time, not with the enthusiasm that they did in 2016. And second of all, those who have watched since and said, this isn't what I voted for. And they're thinking to themselves also, because they have to be thinking to themselves, what comes after Trump? What comes after the idol is gone? The personality manifestation is gone. What becomes of the political movement that is? And what was it in the first place other than a personality cult? And because it was largely a personality cult, as the image around the personality starts to collapse And also, just factually speaking, America just has to continue to exist in one form or another after Donald Trump is president. What do we actually believe in? Actually, apart from the slogan, build the wall that was never built, or lock her up that was never locked. What do we actually believe in? And this is where the whole phenomenon has gone wrong for them, which is that it got a group of people together with fairly radical notions of how bad things were in the United States and how dramatic the changes needed to be. And Donald Trump couldn't and wouldn't deliver that. Now those people are asking themselves, well, okay, what exactly is it that we want? What exactly would, in other words, apart from Donald Trump saying it, what would make America great again?
If the
And
disappointment continues, they're going to have to start a fake nationalist party. The problem is the two-party system is so entrenched in the United States for so long. If they actually had to start another party, if the disappointment with Donald Trump continues, that basically means they've lost control of the two-party narrative. And by that point, if they start a fake nationalist party in the United States that actually gains traction, because of course we have some small nationalist parties that no one's heard of, but if they actually planted one that started to gain traction, it would be too late, and people would see in that the same thing that they see in Donald Trump, which is a dog and pony show.
yeah, I think that Trump was their play in terms of a fake nationalist party. I think
I
it was
mean,
their play. It was turned the Republican Party into a fake nationalist
I
party.
mean, none of us consider Trump a nationalist. I don't even think the diehard MAGA people consider Trump a nationalist.
Well, not now, but did they? Did they in 2016? I think they probably did.
Maybe,
I
maybe,
think
maybe
they
they thought he
probably
was
did.
dog whistling them enough.
But in the intervening period, so I think they've played that. That in other words, the Donald Trump was the third party. If you like, he was the attempt at the third party because structurally speaking, you couldn't create. It was too difficult to create a three-party system or replace one of the two parties that exist in America. They played the third party by playing the Trump and of course the never Trumpers within the Republican Party. And that's played out. So the fake nationalist parties in Europe, for example, like Giorgia Meloni is prime minister of Italy, but the immigrants are coming in. Not only are they coming in at the same rate as they were coming in, they're coming in at a higher rate than they did come in. We've got the AFD in Germany, which is run by a lesbian with a Sri Lankan partner.
Huh.
I'm going to say
Interesting.
I'm going to be polite and leave it at that. A Sri Lankan partner. We've got Rassemblement National in France, which is a complete sellout of what Jean-Marie Le Pen and the Front National actually was. I knew Jean-Marie Le Pen in real life. I met the man, talked to him not many times, but sometimes. And I do not, no more than he himself, I do not recognize the man in his daughter, and I do not recognize the Front National in the party that the Rassemblement National has. So she could become president of France now. Yes, she could probably could become president of France now. Would it make the slightest difference? No, it would not. No, it would not. So again, you have splintered, resurgent nationalist forces in France that are going to have to get their act together. I believe that in Ireland, a fake nationalist party, very heavily funded, very professional and slick, is likely to be created, which will seek to wipe away not just myself obviously, but also the incompetence, because it's basically incompetence of the other pseudo nationalist leaders, because they're not able to do the fake nationalism very well. They don't come across as authentic. They don't come across as particularly competent. They don't come across as particularly intelligent or articulate. So they will have to find one. They will have to create one. And they will be able to do that in Ireland. And people will, at this present moment, will follow it for a while. I have no doubt whatsoever that they will follow it for a while. Whether Ireland has long enough to play at nationalism and then have a real post fake nationalism, I don't know. I don't think so. And that's really what I and Clann are focused on. First of all, we get back legal control of the National Party, but that's a side issue to a bigger question, which is that we need to get control of the nationalist narrative in Ireland before it falls into the hands of a fake nationalist party, in the knowledge that we will be outfunded, that we will be out public relationed, that we will be out mediated, and all of those other questions they are just going to happen. And we're just going to have to try and exist and grow in an environment where we are outmanned, outgunned, outmoneyed, and so on and so forth. But, there's a thing called authenticity as well. And I don't just mean that in the, oh, well, the truth shall set you free, or any kind of overly optimistic or sugary nostrum version of that. But I have a very strong belief that people can see authenticity when they see it. And they can see fakery when they see it. And sometimes they are going along with the fakery as well because they think it's the easiest way to achieve something. But eventually they want authenticity. And it's funny because I had a little bit of a run-in with Ezra Levant of Rebel News here in Ireland. Not a big deal, you would say, in the sense that he just came over and said he wanted to talk to me, to interview me, and I said, I don't talk to Jews. And he tried to make a big thing. He made a big thing out of it. But I will say this much for Ezra Levant. I will say this much in his favor. Is a number of the fake nationalist leaders in Ireland contacted him in the aftermath, and they have suggested that, in fact, I am fake and that I am running some kind of a psyop on the nationalist movement.
Because you don't talk to Jews.
Yeah, and Ezra Levant has corrected them. He has actually corrected them. We've seen the private text messages between them. Now, don't ask me how they came out, but they did come out. And Ezra Levant has said that he believes that I am crazy and he believes that I am evil. But he believes I am genuinely crazy. And he believes I am genuinely evil. He said he has told them he believes in the authenticity of Justin Barrett. The actual phrase he used is, I think he's a true believer.
Of course.
And what an endorsement.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's the kind of endorsement you need from the Jews.
So he's actually a little bit scared of you.
Yeah, we hate this guy. And by the way, don't drop your guard thinking that he's some kind of psyop or some kind of fake or some kind of government-run operation. No, he's not. He's really dangerous.
So it's kind of confirming that the competitors in the other nationalist parties are not authentic, because he made a point of saying that you are authentic. So
yes, and they made a point of running to him and running to him to turn on the money tap, I would suggest. And I would also suggest, although I can never prove it because I didn't follow that line. If I had been more congenial on the day and had done the interview, and we could have had a little chat afterwards, and Ezra would have explained to me how I could be the Tommy Robinson of Ireland. And
of course, if you just accept this large wad of Jewish money. Now, I was going to ask about this because I noticed on, I still call it Twitter, the other day you said you were speaking to Stefan Molyneux, and you said, let's see if I can find it. You said Useless bastard. All you've left is misogyny and Judaism. Cannot believe I broke my own rule and spoke to a Jew. But in fairness, no one told me you were one. So, I mean, I would, after speaking to several Jewish journalists, I started to realize, a while ago that I should have the same rule. And I was wondering if you actually tell them, hey, I don't speak to Jews, or if you just ignore them. So it sounds like if they actually come up to you and want an interview or you message you actually tell them, I don't speak to Jews. I think that's awesome. Or do you just ignore them?
Well, I haven't been in the actual situation because very often, because physically speaking, there aren't many Jews in Ireland. Physically speaking,
Lucky.
now they, as always, they exercise a disproportionate influence, which is incredible.
Well, I mean, their fingers are in there. They're
But
in the pot.
But physically speaking, there are not many in Ireland because there are only about 2,000 of them, 2,500 of them, because Ireland was under British rule, and therefore you could control. If you wanted to control things in Ireland, you control it from London. That was like that. That's an objective thing. You can take that outside of some anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. But if you wanted to control things in Ireland were controlled from London. So if you were, how did the Jews use their influence within Ireland? They used it through London. And so physically speaking, they never moved here in very large numbers. Now, having said that, the current deputy prime minister has actually admitted that he is, in his own words, half Jewish, but he's not a practicing Jew and has never been a practicing Jew. Now we know
Because that matters.
that doesn't matter two damns. Ethnicity is everything, and he's a Jew through the matrilineal line as well. Yeah, I talked to Stephen Molyneux many years ago when he was a big star of the alt-right. And I presume he decided after the interview that I wasn't important enough. But what I see of him today as he has come back is all I see is him trying to create this divide between men and women.
That's what he does. Even years ago, that's what he did. That's his brand, essentially.
Yeah, on the interview with me, he didn't do that. And to be honest, right, I could tell him now. I wouldn't have told him then, because I thought it was a big break for me at the time, in the sense of he was this had this big international audience, and I didn't. But he never broadcast the interview. But that's neither here nor there. Not upset.
Unfortunately, he was one of my introductions to the alt-right many years ago. I started off reading about his books on anarchy and watching his videos, and then I eventually realized he was crazy. And then years later, I realized he was half Jewish, and that kind of explained him being crazy. So.
Yeah, not crazy at all, actually. Crazy in a calculated way. But anyway, the thing about it is that's the word. I hadn't watched many of his videos at the time, so I wasn't particularly familiar with what he was actually saying, other than I knew that when I was offered the interview that it was a quote unquote a big deal, a big opportunity. Now, nothing came of it, and who cares, right? But as he has come back, I have followed him on Twitter and what he's saying on Twitter, and he tried. It's the most Jewish form of anti-Semitism I've ever seen, insofar as he ever expresses any. It's milquetoast doesn't cover it. It's like he's deliberetely parodying a form of anti-Semitism so that it cannot be believable, to the point where it's quite obviously Judaism. It's quite obviously Jewish in and of itself. But above all else, he seems to have reintroduced himself into the public arena with the purposes of being a representative of the nationalist right, and he's not the only one, but he's one of the larger ones, in a way that is so hostile to women he covers it under liberal women and feminist women, but actually, if you parse it, you realize there's no way to be a woman and agree with Stefan Molyneux. There's no woman good enough who meets the standards that he has set for you to be a decent white Western woman. You will always fall short, and therefore you will always be insulted by something, he says. But he is there to drive a wedge between the nationalist movement and women in general. And we have a difficulty on the right. We've always had a difficulty on the right because we are the ideology of reason. We are the ideology of withdrawing emotion from question and approaching them in a very calculated way. Therefore, we have always had a problem in appealing to women who are more emotional. He portrays that as universally negative, that there be an emotional approach to issues. In fact, balance in the world between the genders and in politics is that there must be a degree of calculation and there must be a degree of cold blood, but there must be a degree of emotion and empathy as well. If empathy goes too far, it's destructive. If cold-bloodedness goes too far, it has the same problem. If you were ruled too much by your emotional reaction to a situation, that's absolutely disastrous. But if you calculate things down to the last dime, as it were, you're also you will miss the humanity of the thing. And the humanity of the thing is the purpose of the thing. Because if it's not the humanity of the thing that's the purpose of the thing, then what are we worried about artificial intelligence for? What are we worried about artificial intelligence replacing humanity? So, is it not then just a superior life form? In a Stefan Molyneux view of the world, is this absolutely cold and emotionless ability to calculate exactly the right answer to any given question and damn the consequences as regards actual human beings and actual real human lives and families and so on and so forth. Then isn't AI the superior life form? Or can it not be made the superior life form? And is it therefore not what we should be striving to do? That seems to me to be the logic of it. But real humanity contains the female, the male, the different perspectives, and a politics that is for real human beings has those two perspectives as well.
But trying to ignore or subvert the natural order is a quintessentially Jewish thing to do. It makes sense that Stefan Molyneux is heavily invested in doing just that.
Exactly. And that's a fault line. Now we focused in on one individual who's doing that, but of course we could add a list of names underneath, where a cast of characters, shall we say, like after a movie, who was studio producer, who was script writer, who was fake actor number 27, or man who died in fire number 25, etc. To that list of people whose purpose it is to divert anybody whose political purpose is to divert from the natural order of things. The natural order of things is by definition our enemy. Now, whether they say under that heading, "Oh well, I'm going off on this tangent because I'm a Christian." Well, excuse me. If the natural law, if you understand, it must come from God. So if you're diverting from the natural law under Christian principles, well, then that's a lie. If you're diverting from the natural law for pagan reasons, the same thing. It's a lie. If you but where it's most often diverted from, the natural order, the natural way of ordering the world politics, all the way down to the family unit. If your politics is at odds with the natural law, then you have Jewish politics. Whether
It's a
you
fair,
know
it's a
it or
fair,
not,
fair
it
assessment.
doesn't matter. You have Jewish politics because the Aryan man has always aligned himself to his own benefit with the natural law. And all that National Socialist ideology is, as I understand it, and I am not unread in national texts, as I understand it, is the application of the natural law to the political life of the nation. And that's why it is the ideology I espouse, and that is why it's the ideology I believe in, and that is why it's the ideology that I can die for. And post that, let's post my death. Here's my deal with the pagans is, in my opinion, I can face my God, the God that I believe in, and I think it's a Christian God, but I can face my God, having said I have obeyed the natural law, and I have followed the natural law. Now, you believe that you can face whatever gods you believe in, or you can face the afterlife, having said you have obeyed the natural law. Why do we need to argue about what will happen after we're dead? You know, that's for me to concern myself. When I am dead,
Yeah.
what will happen to my eternal soul that I believe in? Well,
No, there are, yeah, there
I
are
believe
some,
with
yeah.
my God with the natural law.
Yeah, there are. I mean, there's obviously some modern considerations between the different religions and how we're affected by politics. One of the things I heard you say something on an X space recently, and one of the few things that Americans know about Irish history is that they don't like the English very much because there were centuries of oppression and genocide and enslavement. And you had mentioned that apparently Jewish finance was the primary cause of this. The English were able to obtain, whatever money, massive amounts of money they needed to subvert the Irish. It wasn't just that the Jews were handing out money to anybody. They specifically lent money to the English for the purpose of subverting and genociding the Irish. And you mentioned that, well, I think you had mentioned that Protestant theology caused the English to be more susceptible to Jewish influence. And now I'm an Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox Christian, so I can sort of like stand with the Catholics to make fun of the Protestants sometimes, because both the Catholics, the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox, have this like long-standing theological tradition of virulent anti-Semitism. I was wondering, aside from the Scofield Study Bible, which everyone knows about, aside from that, what is it about Protestant theology that makes them more likely to be more susceptible to Jewish influence? Because I would agree with that statement. I don't want to get all the Protestants angry at me now. I know that'll happen, but what do you think
Well,
about it is about that theology?
what I would say there is more that it makes them the Protestant religion, as it expressed itself in the Reformation in particular, was more amenable to the needs of finance capitalism, and drew its values from finance capital, and therefore was more amenable to the Industrial Revolution and the manner in which it would take place. Not because obviously the Industrial Revolution occurred as a result of inventions that nobody could have anticipated at the time, but that Catholicism was the natural enemy of anarcho-capitalism in a way that Protestantism was not, and none of the Protestant denominations at the time of the Reformation were. Now, that's the extent to which they were more open to being pawns of the Jewish world plan, shall we say, or the
Yeah.
Jewish European plan, as it would have been then, is because they were more amenable. One of the things is the doctrine of predestination. And the doctrine of predestination, to me, is absolutely disastrous to the moral character of a practicing Christian. But I don't want to go into that too much because
Yeah,
precisely that, because there's a Protestant who will come on and say, I don't believe in that, and I don't believe in anarcho-capitalism, and I don't think my Protestant faith aligns
Right.
with what you're saying.
And that's
This
fair.
is the point. This is the point at which you and I have to hold up our hands and go, if you tell me that your faith does not prevent you from being a good National Socialist, I take you at your word. And until such time as you've said something in the name of Protestantism that is contrary to the natural law or contrary to the interests of Western culture, civilization, and the white man, until you've said something that's contrary to that, then I will take you at your word that your Protestantism does not make you more amenable. But functionally and politically, the Reformation was most certainly, whether it was correct theologically, I'll leave to somebody else to argue, but politically, it destroyed the unity of Christendom. And everybody can agree with that. If you're coming from the Protestant point of view, you can say, well, the Catholic Church abandoned true Christianity, and so we were forced to do so. Well, then it's the Catholics' fault. But somebody destroyed Christendom. Somebody destroyed the unity of Christendom. And it happened at the time of the Reformation. Now, whether it was the Catholic Church's fault for not reforming, or whether it was the Protestants' fault for reforming and leaving, is a matter for debate. But
Yeah.
what's not a matter for debate is that schism weakened Christendom, weakened Europe, introduced the anarcho-capitalist view, which was later to be adopted by the Catholics anyway. So it's not something we should fight about now. For example,
Yeah.
I'm not going to bat. I'm not going to bat for Pope Francis, and like, let us hope from respect at least, that he rests in peace, but his overall effect on the world while he was held the papacy was bad. The current pope does not look to be much better, so I'm not going to bat for modern institutional Catholicism. Well, I'm not. So I'm not willing to fight with a good solid Protestant believing National Socialist who believes in Western values, Western civilization, the 14 words and 88. I'm not going to argue with him about religion,
Yeah.
except as perhaps a point of interesting discussion. But I'm
Yeah.
certainly not going to say, I had a conversation with him and I'm not working with him anymore because.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I personally blame the entire Protestant Reformation. I actually blame it on Martin Luther's chronic constipation. I think he was just in a bad mood all the time, and that led him to do things that theologically didn't make a whole lot of sense. But that's a good point. We have to take the nationalist movement around the world will benefit a lot if people just take the word of others in the movement that they believe what they believe and don't try to pick apart. Well, you're a part of this religion, and I think this religion says this, and da 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 da. You have to take the person's word. They believe what they believe. Their moral code is in line with yours. And if people did that a lot more rather than sort of controlling the religions of others, a lot
And
of this
also,
fragmentation
and
would
also
would go away.
yeah, here's your preliminary: is you assume, except when you're dealing with an ethnic Jew, you assume that the person is acting in good faith until, and I mean good faith on a moral sense, not in a religious sense, but is acting in good faith until proven otherwise. You test them like you test anybody else in terms of the friends you have in your life and so on and so forth. If their words are contrary to their actions, you would quickly realize that they're faking it. And but if somebody's actual actions and speech align with what I believe is necessary for the safety and welfare of the white man, Western cultural civilization, and is within the context of Ireland as a nation, is Irish, Gaelic, true to the spirit of the Irish people, then I am not interested in what religious denomination he refers to himself as after that, so long as his words align with his actions and so long as his words are not contrary to the natural law. I don't
Right.
see a need to argue about where everything went wrong or who was responsible, because when we come down to individuals' responsibility, let's take there is a collective responsibility. There's two collective responsibilities here that are far more important than going through this individual or that individual. It is the collective responsibility of the Jewish people to have always been the underminers and the subversives within Western society. And it has been the collective responsibility of Western culture and society and the white Aryan European and European descendant man to have allowed them to do that. And if you solve those two problems, then how you get your soul into heaven, or maybe you just don't think there exists a soul, is not going to ultimately affect what happens in the temporal world, in the political world, right now, right here, or in the near future. We need to know two things. Collectively, the Jew has always been the enemy. And I'm not interested in being told about the one good Jew. Joe McCarthy fell for that.
Doesn't exist.
Richard Nixon fell for that. Everybody who's tried it has of significance. Are there some good Jews out there? Maybe there are. I don't know. But I will make this discriminatory opening statement, which is that I will make that prejudiced decision to take you as a collective, as a people, when I'm talking about the Jews. And when I'm talking to an individual, yes, I will hold him responsible for what his people have collectively done. And I will not trust him that he is on our side and he is the one good Jew, because anybody who has done so has come a cropper because of it. On the second side, and this is really important, gets back to we only have 2,500 Jews in Ireland, literally, like physically speaking. In the United States, they do not make up a significant number of the population. So the guilt for the Jews being able to get away with what they have gotten away with lies with the white collective. You can talk about countries, like South Africa, where the white man is already a minority in his own homeland. And you can talk about the fact that the white minority, well, what can it do? And what will happen to the United States when and if whites are a minority within the United States? What will happen then? But while the white man in the United States was the overwhelming majority of the population, he allowed himself and herself. He allowed himself to collectively be undermined and subverted by the Jew. And he cannot just dismiss his own responsibility for having been duped on the Jew. The Jew can only dupe a person who is foolish enough to be duped at the end of the day. And so there's an extent to which we have to take upon ourselves as individuals. We have to say, at one point in my life, I was part of the problem. And collectively, my people are part of the problem. And that my people are part of the problem because they are stupid enough to allow themselves to be robbed by these international hyenas. And we have 199 countries, 1,030 times worth of evidence to show that they never change and they never behave differently. And each and every time, pagan societies, Christian societies, secular societies have forgiven them and let them back in. And
Strange.
have a collective
Yeah,
responsibility.
Cornelius Cadrano, the Romanian famously said, "A nation has the Jews it deserves."
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much that is bang on the mark.
And we have to take some responsibility
We have
collectively for
responsibility.
not teaching our children well enough over the generations that, hey, this is a group that has always sort of subverted us over time. We can't let them in, and we can't forget in 3 generations and let them in again.
Yes, yeah, and it is the joke is the like fool me once, shame on you. Right, that's the Jew. Right, that's the Jew's fault. He fooled us once, but when he fooled us the second time, was it all his fault? When he fooled us the 1030th time, I think at that stage, no more than as David Irving says, why don't they look in the mirror after being hunted out of 109 countries and ask themselves, is it something about me that causes me to be hunted out of 109 countries? On the other side, those 109 countries have to ask themselves, if it's happened this many times, how often could they have been wrong? And am I now right in thinking they've changed? And the 1030 other times were wrong, but I'm so brilliant. I personally am so clever that I can fix the mistake that 1030 times was impossible to fix. We have to accept our own responsibility too, and we have to become Jew phobic. And I actually, this is the one time when that actually makes sense. Fear of. Jew-phobic.
Yeah.
We have a right to be afraid
It's
because
much better than the term anti-Semitic, because the term anti-Semitic brings up all these questions of biblical genealogy and what does the term actually mean. And the whole field of ethnolinguistics was invented by Jews as well. So we need a better term than that. Jew-phobic is much better.
yeah, well, but the main point I make in that context is we need to actually be afraid of them. Like we need to have a healthy fear. There's such a thing as a healthy fear. There's an unhealthy fear which causes you to cower in the corner. But there is a healthy fear which causes you to react to immediate and deadly danger. And it is to talk about the masculine virtue. There's the masculine virtue to respond to the immediate threat with a proportionate response to that threat, instead of pretending it's not there. And it doesn't require that you not be afraid. It does require you to march through whatever fears you have and do what needs to be done.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot more that we could talk about, but I do have to wrap it up because I don't want to stretch the attention span of my viewers too much. So I just want to ask you one last thing. Obviously, our movement in Ireland and in the U.S. as well, it's fragmented. There's a lot of different associations. There's a lot of organizations. Some are controlled by Mossad, some aren't. There's a lot of fighting, specifically religious infighting. Um, what's your advice, not to the leadership of those movements, but to the normal people that are watching all this stuff happen on the internet, that are considering which organizations to join, that are engaging in the actual discourse on a personal level? What should we do personally to help unite all these organizations and actually form a common front against what's happening in the world?
Well, within
Huge question, I know.
yeah, no, when it's actually it is and it isn't, right? Because it can be how to do it is a complex question, but what needs to be done is actually quite simple. And you can once again you can find it in Mein Kampf. It's in the chapter the strong man is mightiest alone. Is that instead of trying to, and this is something that's going on in Ireland now, so I'm sure it's going on in the other countries as well. Instead of trying to get all these groups together and sit down at a table and agree on the lowest common denominator, which is to say, what like compromise and agree that and so on and so forth. Can we not arrive at, and this is the complexity of how does this happen in practice? So when we all arrive at a situation where the movement that is right, that is absolutely correct, gathers the membership of all the others, not on a compromise around a table for an agreement, but where that movement's authenticity and truth becomes so apparent by the faith and devotion of its membership and by its ideological correctness that people start to see through everything else as having been a sham. And in Ireland, because I can only speak for Ireland because I'm only familiar enough with Ireland to say this, is the only organization which actually exists and which must in the end be the only organization that does exist for the advancement of Irish nationalism and Irish existence is Clann. And maybe the National Party will be the expression of that in the political sense, but Clann ideologically. And ultimately, the other organizations and groups and movements are going to have to fall by the wayside. They are going to have to literally fall by the wayside, disappear, and stop existing. And the people in them are going to have to join that, quite literally, the one true way. Now, how that is to be done in practical terms, certainly I can't advise you at all in the United States for the obvious reason that I am not familiar with the individuals and the characters involved, not familiar with the biases and so forth of any of them. I take a view as regards America is that I will talk to anybody, listen to anybody, and so on and so forth, as long as they don't tell me what I should do in Ireland, because I know what the situation in Ireland on the ground. And I know the situation on the ground in Ireland, and I know who's fake and I know who's not. I know who's telling the truth and I know who's not. I know who's saying things that are not true, but they believe they're true. And so that's a good faith person as far as I'm concerned. Somebody who's mistaken, but is still of sound character and can be persuaded. I know that situation in Ireland. I don't know it anywhere else. So I have to traverse the complexities of our own situation before I would even go across to Britain even, or to England, and start advising them. All I know is this. All I'd say to England and to any other country is this is the one thing we can be absolute about. And it's is if any group or organization aligns themselves, and in particular, I'm talking about Tommy Robinson here, aligns themselves with the Jew, then you know it's a fraud. Then you know it's a fraud. With regard to people, to everybody who aligns against the Jew, will there be some fakes in there? There inevitably will be some fakes in there, and we have to keep our eyes out for them. But anybody who proclaims there can be a pro-Zionist nationalism in their country, whether French, German, Italian, Polish, Russian, whatever, there can be a pro-Jewish nationalism, or there can be a race-blind nationalism. There cannot be. That person's just straight up lying. That person is just straight up lying. And I don't know if Tommy Robinson has just sniffed too many lines at this point, that he doesn't know the difference between the real world and not the real world.
He was an easy catch for Mossad. All they had to do is offer him free cocaine for life, and that was it for him. That's my theory, at least.
Yeah, I don't know if he actually believes in anything, to be honest. Yeah. I don't know if he actually believes in anything at all. I don't even know if he believes in the wrong thing. But I know he says the wrong thing. Yeah. And I know he says enough of the right thing to mislead good people.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Yeah. Now, how can people find your organization, Clann Eireann? Does it have a website? Is there a way that we can finance it?
Yeah, clannaeireann.ie is the easiest way to get directly in contact with the organization. And of course, you can follow my Twitter or my Telegram channel, which is under my own name, or the Clann Eireann Twitter or Telegram channel, which is under and we have a YouTube channel and so on and so forth. All the usuals of social media, which we have so far, I don't know how, but we have so far managed to hold on to all of them. I don't expect that to be forever, but we have one great advantage in Ireland, which is it's our disadvantage in another way. ultimately, because we'll have to face the outside world. But we're a small country, and because we're a small country, the social media in general, these are all important things. But the fact of the matter is that you can go from one end of the country to the other end of the country in one day. And so I can start in the morning at one end of the country, get in my car, travel to the other end of the country and do a speech in front of a group of people at the other end of that country, and travel back again the following day down to another event that is, so we can reach all Irish people with great difficulty, with great difficulty, but we can reach all Irish people without social media, if that's ultimately what actually happens. But at the moment, the easiest way for Americans, for people in North America in general, to get in contact with the party and get, or the group, and get an idea of what we stand for, what we believe in, is start with the website, which is clann.ie, and from there it'll lead out to all the other social media pages.
Great, and I highly recommend everyone follow this guy on Twitter. It's total riot. It's great. So thanks. It's been great having you on. We could talk about a whole lot of other things, but it's been a great conversation. Thank you for coming on, and I'll be posting the link to the website below the video and everything, so people can check it out.
Excellent. Thank you very much for having me on. Thank you.
I hope they'll make you prime minister in a few years.
Well, yeah.
You never know. Things can change very quickly.
They can. With a dramatic series of events, yes. But look, that's not what I'm not focused on political ambition in that personal sense. But what I am focused on, a little bit like George Lincoln Rockwell said, is I want to leave something behind that is on its way to victory.